Hey guys, welcome back. It's your favorite B-hole, and today we are going to go over a Bone Spear Necro build. If you want to see what it looks like against Uber Lilith or bosses or a Nightmare Dungeon, you can fast forward to the end. So let's start with the Book of the Dead. I chose critical strike chance for my sacrifice skeletons. There are good options for all of these, but what I chose is the critical strike chance because mine is low, and maximum essence because, again, my essence is low, didn't get much on gear. The 15% damage to vulnerable enemies is really good for an option, but essence is key for this build again. For your golem sacrifice, the only option that you should be picking here is the increased critical strike damage. So let's get into the meat and potatoes, the skills. I think a lot of different Bone Spear Necros are running similar builds to this. I have some slight variations. For example, on Bone Splinters, I chose the Acolyte's Bone Splinters because that additional critical strike chance is extremely helpful with this build. Again, my crit strike chance is extremely low. Bone Spear, level this up all the way. You're going to get some insane damage with it, I'm sure, as you know. There are two options. You can pick whatever you need, but I chose vulnerable because I stacked on as much vulnerable damage as I could, and that really helps out with big boss damage as well as elites. Unliving Energy and Imperfectly Balanced, I leveled all the way up. We're getting as much damage out of this as we can in hopes of clearing Uber Lilith. You probably can with this build. I'm just lazy and, you know, there's a skill issue, so there's that. I only put one into Corpse Explosion to put my points elsewhere, and that's all we really need to get back essence, do additional damage, which we'll get into on the Paragon board, and then Bone Prison, because putting something in that Bone Prison, it'll recharge your essence, as well as make whatever gets trapped in there vulnerable. And again, stacking on that vulnerable damage, making them vulnerable whenever you need it, whenever you can, and getting back as much essence as you can is really going to help out this build in regard to the damage, as well as how much you can spam that core ability, since your Bone Spear is going to be doing so much. For Death's Embrace and Death's Reach, I just maxed these out because extra damage, but the truth is you don't really need Embrace. But I use it in case enemies do get close to me. I won't take as much damage. You can take skill points out of Embrace and put it in a curse if you'd like, and that would be extremely helpful. As well as the Rapid Ossification, if that's what it's called here. You can take those out and put them into either Iron Maiden or Decrepify, whatever fits you best. Corpse Tendrils. I leveled that up as much as I could. As nice as the vulnerable perk is on the Plagued Corpse Tendrils, I just stuck to the base so I could level it up as much as possible to get that cooldown as low as I could, so I can spam it as much as I want, since I'm not using the heart that automatically triggers it. It is key for you to max out Serration, Compound Fracture, and Evulsion. It is extremely important. You'll do a ton of damage. You saw that. I was getting attacked in my menu, just came out and pretty much one-shot him for 3 million. It's really quick, really easy build as far as the skill points and what they do. You know, extra damage to vulnerable. That's why we want Bone Prison and Bone Spear applying vulnerable to everything. You get 5% extra damage per level, so if you get an amulet with either of those skills, Evulsion or Compound Fracture, that is going to make a huge difference. I maxed out Standalone, since we are not using any minions, and Memento Mori. This allows us to really maximize on those sacrifices that you are making for your minions. A lot of people do use Inspiring Leader, but I didn't really care. So Bone Storm, it is fantastic. I chose the one-handed weapon because I was lucky enough to get a lidless wall, which makes Bone Storm amazing, as well as getting that 20% critical strike chance as long as it's up. And then, of course, Ossified Essence, you want that as your passive, and that's why Essence is so important. You get higher critical strike chance as well as higher critical strike damage. Anything that's above 50 Essence, which is another reason why you want to stack your Essence there. So let's get into the Paragon. All right. So here's what my Paragon looks like. A lot of fun. So for the base starter, I used Sacrificial for my Glyph spot. That really is just used for that 10% extra damage as well as buffing all of those rare nodes. There wasn't too much thought that went into that base one. It's really easy, really quick, and it's extremely helpful. You can't really play around with too much in that starter one. My second board is Bone Graft. I'll let you read that there. You know, you get a lot of additional damage as well as Essence when you're hitting enemies with your bone skills. So naturally, with Essence being such a huge modifier, we want that. I used Exploit as my glyph here, which is huge again, since obviously we're focusing on vulnerable damage. Putting it in this glyph socket is extremely helpful because you get these dexterity slots up here with the sharpening of bone. The dexterity will add 1% additional vulnerable damage for every 5 dex, so it's definitely a no-brainer to put that one here. My second board is Scent of Death. With at least 2 corpses nearby, you gain, 15% damage reduction. With no corpses nearby, you deal 15% increased damage. So this helps when you're walking into a mob, you fire off that first shot, you make some corpses, you throw up your tendrils, and then you're just going to get increased critical strike damage, which is in the gear that we'll talk about later. The glyph that I used here was Imbiber. A lot of people, I'm sure, know about this. 107% damage while healthy is a lot. Since you're attacking from a distance, for the most part, using this bone spear is extremely helpful to use Imbiber. I used it in this location on this board because there are so many willpower nodes that help really buff the amount of healthy damage that you get out of it. So Imbiber is the name of that glyph. The next board is Flesh Eater. Consuming 5 corpses gives 40% increased damage. You will see 5 corpses on bosses a lot more than you think if you build out your skill tree how I have mine. I used Gravekeeper to increase damage to elites. As far as the Bone Spear Necro, I looked through all of the glyphs and I don't really see any better options for this, so I put that here. The increased damage for every close corpse is great, but we do want to pop those, so I'm primarily using it for the damage to elites. Because as you can see, 72% damage is much better than 40 or 30. Yeah, you know, math. Bunch of math. It's really good here. That's a lot of damage, and intelligence also is going to increase your skill damage. So I figured this would be a good location to use that glyph. The final board, and I say final board because we don't care about the dexterity requirement to meet here, but it is Bloodbath. I don't really care too much about the damage while fortified, but there is quite a few dexterity nodes in this area, and it was really close, and that's what we were aiming for. That giving us critical strike damage is extremely helpful. You get 97% more critical strike damage, and that is, you know, a lot. Show me any weapon that you get 97% critical strike damage on, and I will replace this board in a heartbeat. But that's what we use this for. It's the Essence Glyph, just for the critical strike damage. So yeah, that is the Paragon boards that I use and the glyphs that I use. So we'll just take a quick look. There really isn't any room for any extra nodes. Just a couple that I put into intelligence at the very beginning, but this will use every single Paragon point except for 2 or maybe 3 in order to maximize on it. So I think this is a very, very good build as far as the Bone Spear Necro. Yeah, those were the 3 extra points that I had, and I put them into intelligence for critical or skill damage. All right, last but not least, the gear. So what we got here, Deathless Visage, who would have guessed? The armor, I got really lucky. There is flat damage, bone skill damage, and physical damage. If you can get a triple threat like that on your armor, definitely keep it. The aspect, whatever you want. I chose increased armor when I deal any form of damage. The gloves, the most important thing is the max rank of Bone Spear, that +4, and I think the 5% chance to restore your primary resource is extremely helpful. The critical strike damage with bone skills is always a perk, and I chose attack speed because I like to be a speedy boy. My pants. Bro, my pants. Those are awful. Don't do any of that. Get intellect. Whatever aspect. The boots, +4 ranks of Corpse Tendrils. This is to help my cooldown on that ability, and the essence cost reduction is extremely important. I know that is flat, but I also got intellect and movement speed on there. There aren't many options as far as the aspects, so I chose more movement speed on crit strike since I get so many crits. The splintering aspect is what you want on your weapon. Most people use this on a two-handed weapon because it gives so much more additional vulnerable damage. It's not just vulnerable damage, it's bonus damage to vulnerable enemies, so you get a lot. I chose the one-handed because I like the lidless wall and I get extra essence, which I have none of. The most important is the amulet here with the aspect of grasping veins. You get 30% critical strike chance as well as 60% critical strike damage when you put this on an amulet. That's so much. You just really cannot replace that. Especially since you're already putting the splintering aspect on your weapon. Most people do the two-handed because it doubles that, and you kind of are tempted to put the grasping veins on your two-handed weapon, but that vulnerable damage is too much, so I put it on the amulet. These stats on here are exactly what you want. Essence cost reduction, damage, and then 3 ranks of the Evulsion or Compounding Fracture passive. They're the most important things, and I chose movement speed because I like to be a fastest boy, y'all. So that's what I have. I think this is key. The heart I chose is because I like it. You don't really need that, so you could replace that with anything else you wanted. The rings, both of them should reflect this. Hopefully they roll better, but you want number 1, vulnerable damage, number 2, critical strike damage, number 3, maximum essence, and then number 4, critical strike damage with bone skills, in that order. So both of my rings pretty much have that. I replaced bone skill damage with physical damage on this because I didn't get bone skill, and I got lucky hit chance because of, you know, that 5% chance to restore some of my primary resource. I didn't mind it. I kept it. I used it, and I put my barber on here. It's a 3.2 barber with 15% chance, but if you can, on one of your rings or your amulet, get this vicious heart where you gain critical strike damage, but your non-criticals will do less damage, but who cares? You're going to be critting a lot. So that sums up the gear and the aspects. Last but not least, the stats. You want as much intelligence as you can get, as that affects your skill damage. A little bit of one-handed versus two-handed weapons. That's 500 weapon damage that I lose out on. My lackluster critical strike chance. But critical strike damage with bone and just flat critical strike damage, you want to stack as high as possible. I have overpower damage, but who cares? I wish I could put it somewhere else, but is what it is. 97 vulnerable damage. Those are the stats that you want the most. So we'll just look through these really quick and give you something to have comparison to. But yeah, I hope this is helpful to my fellow necromancers who are trying to play as a Bone Spear Necro, who are trying to clear Uber Lilith. If you like the information here, definitely like and subscribe. It really helps me out. Check me out on Instagram, TikTok, wherever. Any views, likes, sharing, it's all helpful to allow me to keep doing this. I appreciate you taking the time to watch my video, and have a good day.